Welcome to Canucks This Week. Patrick Johnston joining myself, Paul Chapman. The video brought to you by Paragon Roofing, BC.ca. Residential, commercial, roof installation, roof replacement, really easy. Go to their site, you just plug in your details. They will come and give you a free estimate, free inspection, tell you if you need a new roof. Patrick, do the Canucks need a new roof? Did it cave in a bit this
No,
week?
I mean maybe Rogers Arena does, but that'd be a good contract for. Yeah, no, they listen. As we talked about last
Three
week,
losses out of four. And this is the guy
they
who picked
played
him going to undefeated.
they played a lot of hockey.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of hockey. I mean, there's 15 games between now and Christmas.
Yeah.
Like they played 15 games in November. They played 15. It is an incredibly tough stretch. To close. I mean, the first half doesn't really end until almost the All-Star break, but in terms of the pre-Christmas period, they're very busy. They're playing every other night. It's inevitable fatigue's going to hit them. And Rick Tocchet predicted this at the end of October. He said we have a lot of hockey to come. We got to be careful. Rest and recovery is going to be really important. I find myself wondering, I'm sure a lot of those players would like to be, we're talking about Thursday, right before the 49ers and the Seahawks play, but that's obviously would be a big event, a good way to kind of maybe do something else, feel some real life. That's the kind of event that, the Canucks have gone to Seahawks games in the past. But would you be better off sitting in your hotel room, just resting? Their rest is such a rare commodity in the NHL. This is a challenging time for the Canucks, and more than anything, I think it comes back to what the coach said himself last weekend, and the players are echoing a bit more themselves. They know that they need to manage their way through games better than they have. The third period has been challenging. It's no surprise given that fatigue is an element at play right now. You get tired late games, you're going to fall away. They need to find a way to manage themselves through these scenarios better than they have more than anything. But no, they don't need a roof.
Well, yeah, obviously being facetious there, but I think anyone who's watched this team for more than 2 years recognizes that the season does always ebb and flow. And when you,
right,
I think we were surprised perhaps at the adaptation so thoroughly of Rick Tocchet's system, of big leaps in performance from Quinn Hughes, a return for Brock Besser.
yes.
Probably say that Miller. I think Pettersson's probably on par with where he was last year. And then so you look at maybe they added Philip Hronek, a couple of other
Yeah.
pieces. This isn't a team that went out and added Connor Bedard and
Right.
Victor Hedman. Like, this wasn't, you were looking at it going, oh my God, this team's going to win the Stanley Cup. We had seen an advancement. I'm not even going to call this a regression, as you said. It could just be tired, some bad luck in the last week. But really, we've used this cliche, I guess, before, that U.S. Thanksgiving is where
Yeah.
teams generally are. So is this where the Canucks are, at the upper echelon of the Western Conference? Do you think there's a little more of a leveling out still to come when we get, I'm talking about when we get to playoffs, and if you're separating a team that just might win a round or two or a team that can win the whole thing?
Well, as it stands, they're a team that I think could certainly win a round. We haven't seen them up against the LA Kings. I think they're most likely to finish second or third in the division, and most likely will end up playing the Kings in that spot. Can they beat that's the question to me. Can they beat the Kings? Can they overcome a Kings team that right now probably doesn't have convincing goaltending? But what if the Kings make a trade for a goalie? Obviously they're now in a bit of a competition with like the Edmonton Oilers, who clearly are looking for a goalie, who clearly think they can still make the playoffs, even though the hill they now have to climb is astounding. The Canucks are a team that is gonna, unless something catastrophic happens, given how they've played so far. I've written a numbers piece about this. They're playing at worst sort of 50-50 hockey, but with the top end talent they have, with the goaltending they have, this is a team that's going to put up enough points that'll get them solidly into the playoffs. That is
Home advantage.
What's that?
Home advantage?
Yeah, I mean that's the question. Can you get second, right? Like, but really, they're in a position now where they are a team that really should be looking, I think, to be adding to this roster. They're obviously still a bit challenged in terms of their cap setup, but it's not impossible. You know, you could look at like a guy like Anthony Beauvillier. You could just move him easily to, say, the San Jose Sharks. Don't have to pay much of a price. Sharks need NHL players. You the thing he has right now that he brings to the table is cap space. That's $4 million that you'd rather use on, say, another winger or a defenseman. Ideally, I think the Canucks would like to find another defenseman. Obviously, the Ethan Bear question is going to start bubbling up more and more as he gets closer to health. I mean, you know, basically he was predicting himself when I talked in the summer, you know, sometime in December, he believed he'd be healthy. All signs suggest that. He's been skating in West Kelowna. That would be a great addition, I think, in terms of depth defenseman. But they still, I'm sure the Canucks would like to add like a guy who fit in solidly on the second pairing. Obviously, every team in the NHL is looking to do that, so that's a difficult task. But nonetheless, that is something that's there. Obviously, the Connor Garland question remains to be resolved to a degree. Whether they find a way to sort of convince him to stay, whether they decide that that's a guy that they really do want to keep around. That's where they're at. This is a team that should be adding, because if they do start adding, then you do start talking about, okay, can they win more than one round? Can they get into the conference finals? You know, that is, as I wrote about last year's in the playoffs, that is the real story. It's not so much when anything can happen. It's, are you set up? How good are you set up really to sustain yourselves over a long playoff run? You know, obviously you need a goalie playing well, but you need also just depth, and you need strength in numbers. And the teams at the end of the day, almost every year, are one of the top teams in the league. They're not some long shot Cinderella story.
So you kind of answered my question, but I'd kind of put it on a T for you here, because I know that you're writing, you know, we record this at the end of the week. Typically, you're writing a weekend piece on reasons why the Canucks could win the Stanley Cup, and then we're also looking at reasons why they couldn't. So I was hoping you would tee that up. You can get it at theprovince.com. Subscribe to the Canuck Report. Newsletter will get delivered to you right away, or go pick up a hard copy. But yeah, honestly, I want to ask you, is this a team that you could see with the right addition or two? Like, we're deep enough into the season right now that you know that this is a good team. Can they win the Stanley Cup?
Can they win the Stanley Cup? I mean, as a constructed, no. But things are going right. I mean, let's go back to that Jim Rutherford quote at the beginning of the year, right before the season.
I'm going to do an office thing here, Patrick, and I'm going to like look into the camera and speak to the audience. The assignment to Patrick was reasons why the Canucks could win a Stanley Cup. That's what you're supposed to read. Patrick just told you no in one word. Read the article anyway.
I know. I said here's why. There's things why. I've already kind of touched on it, right? So the fact that they're doing so much heavy lifting in their, here's why. That it could work. And I'm going to say here's the things to consider. You know, the schedule, they're doing all this heavy lifting right now in the schedule. But the second half of that schedule, the consequence of all this heavy lifting is a much easier run up to the season. The Canucks have always liked having more.
In terms of workload, this has been a pretty, as our dear friend Jason Botchford would say, this is kind of a McSofty month in terms of the schedule.
In terms of opposition, I'm just saying in terms of rated games. But the more rest you have, the better you have it to win. You know, that in terms of having heavy games, heavy schedule. But you know, you play the Sharks, you play teams that are just not as strong.
And in your time zone for the most part, yeah.
And in your time zone, and in general, the Canucks have been picking up those wins, right? You're going to lose some games, like you're not going to win every. But they're going through this heavy part of the schedule, a lot of games in a short amount of time. You get to Christmas, and then things start to smooth out. They have just more manageable road trips. They have more manageable homestands. They are going to be finding themselves in a position where they are not going to have to tax themselves as much physically at a time of year that is generally really hard, right? Like the second half of the season, teams start hitting an injury wall around 65 games. Well, if you're not playing as often, that is going to give you a chance to have recovery, to give your players a chance to feel better, and then you get to the playoffs. And so if you're not having put pedal to metal to get into the playoffs, first of all, but also just in that run out to the end of the season, you know, that's setting themselves up well to be one of the healthier teams in the NHL going to the playoffs. I've sort of touched on it already. Like, are they able to upgrade this roster? If they can upgrade this roster, you add a winger, you push Phil DiGiuseppe down to the third or fourth line. Like, he's been a very handy winger, very useful player. I wrote him yesterday. He's the Canucks' best forechecker. But in the end, you would like to find a more talented player to play with JT Miller and Brock Besser. That's the kind of, you have to understand how you're resetting your roster by doing something like that. Like I said, you say you add Ethan Bear, but you still want to try to add another defenseman. Ethan Bear is obviously better than Noah Juleson. Can you find a player that's better than Mark Friedman? Can you find a player that is going to make you lean on Tyler Myers even less than you already have? Myers has played well. The system has been calm. That is a coaching. I mean, to be clear, the contrast that you look at last season versus this season, you want to see how bad the Canucks were defending last year. Go watch the Edmonton Oilers right now. The Edmonton Oilers are such a tire fire, such a train wreck. Pick your metaphor, any terrible metaphor you want. That is what the Edmonton Oilers look like defensively, and that's what the Canucks looked like defensively last year. They're doing such a better job of controlling things in their own end, which ties into goaltending, right? Like the foundation of this team is so strong in terms of how they're playing and in terms of as a forward and defensive units, but also in terms of their goaltending. So you can upgrade, you can build from that, you can make this team better. The power play, the special penalty has been fine. It hasn't been world beating, but the power play has been a big story. Obviously, that's a game changer. You get elite special teams. You play 50-50 hockey at 5-on-5, but elite special teams will make a difference, right? Like the challenge, obviously, you go into the playoffs is that there's fewer and fewer penalties called. So, as things progress, that's less and less of a weapon, and it becomes more and more about your 5-on-5, which comes back to improving the lineup. Now, the challenge in the end, I think that the biggest challenge this team is going to face, first of all, yes, can they upgrade the lineup? How does depth affect this situation, right? They don't actually
seems to be doing okay.
Abbotsford's doing great. There are some really interesting young players there, but I don't know if we necessarily say this is a deep organization right now. I mean, that is to what I was touching on before. Jim Rutherford talked about it himself at the beginning of the season. We have to have everything go right? They have so far had almost everything go right. Lately, not so much. We look at Elias Pettersson, who seems to be fighting through. I suspect it's a groin injury. He's fighting his way through that. Can they afford to have him sit out for a couple of games to get recovered, to kind of get better from that? I'm not so sure. I mean, you're never going to replace a superstar player like that. So you start looking around the edges of the lineup. Okay, right now we'll see what happens with Tyler Myers and Mark Friedman going forward based on Wednesday. But that's such an example. We're asking the questions: who comes up? Well, there's not a whole lot to come up. They've already got Akito Hirose up because Carson Soucy's out. You're looking at like Christian Wolanin, who had a really good season in the AHL last year, was reasonably capable when he came up late in the season. But in the end, there's a reason why he's in the American Hockey League and not the NHL, right?
Yeah.
Like that's where the Canucks are at. So depth, how much is their depth tested and how much are they able to manage their way through this? That's a big question for me. The division itself, I mean, they are chasing down the defending Stanley Cup champions. It is really hard to repeat in the NHL just because your offseason is so short, the recovery aspect, all that stuff. But you look at Vegas, the depth, the strength from top to bottom, the coaching, like that. There's a reason they are once again in first place. We saw the Colorado Avalanche on Wednesday. They won the Stanley Cup 2 years ago, and they are again a deep, strong team, smart coach. They do lots of things really well. You're looking at who you're going up against in the playoffs. I've already mentioned the Kings. The Kings are such a fascinating factor in all this. Interesting young team, made some really great additions, and then have the ageless wonder and I'll say Kopitar. Like, that's a team that is clearly on the upswing. How do the Canucks match up against them? That is, in the end, those are the big questions that I have in all this. And so, right now as it stands, are the Canucks a Stanley Cup contender? I don't think so, but they're close, and there's a lot of reasons why I think they could be. I mean, they could be this, say they make a trade. Next week, we could be changing the story on this question, right? But that's how close they are to it, that week to week they could turn themselves
personally, I think they're maybe one move away from at least being in the conversation. And then I think the longer term, if you're just looking at progress for the Canucks this year, it's what happens after this year, right? I mean, you're seeing Hughes, Pettersson, Miller in their peak. And trading away all those first round picks, what's coming, right? Like, it's not like every year you have these we've got this great kid who should be ready next year. I will say though, you know, if you obviously the legacy of the NHL is different. It's changed a lot. In '82, of course, when they had 5 game series, it was LA
Right.
who took out the beast
Yeah.
in the West for them. In '94, even the best team by far was the Red Wings. Remember that when Toronto and Detroit were in the Western
Right.
Conference?
Yeah.
You know, and the Flames were just 1 game better than the Canucks in the regular
Yeah.
season. So that
Right.
meant that
Right.
game 7 was in Calgary. Canucks came from that. 2011, they were the beasts. And then we saw in 2012, the 8th seed took them out, or, you know,
Yeah.
in that period, they kept disappointing. So anything can happen. And you can sit there and look at Vegas and go, yeah, but what if someone else takes out
Sure.
Vegas, right? Then
Yeah.
the door opens. But I know what you mean. We're looking for progress here.
Well, and you know, in those, say Edmonton does somehow find their way and they go on this all thing, they have to win 2/3 of
Yeah.
their games, basically. Say they
I,
somehow do that. Yeah, they're a 4th seed team, right? Like that's the kind of team on a hot streak that could conceivably take out Vegas, but you know that's going to be a tough series. And where does that leave them in the second round? I mean, we're talking
yeah,
extreme hypotheticals, but you're
we
right.
we
Like,
are, and it's a long way to go. It's just I'm
yeah,
looking at this milepost, you know, about 25% of the way through, and I do think teams are generally what they are.
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
You talk about Edmonton. I think when you're trying to beat the same team 4 times, and that's what you're offering up on goaltending, I don't think you have a shot
No,
to even.
I think
I don't think they'll make the playoffs. But I don't even think they'll get out of the first round if they do. That's a combination for another day. So we do finish up here, Patrick. If we look at the next week, I was spectacularly wrong, but they've got,
classic.
you
Yes.
know, yeah, Friday and Saturday, Seattle, San Jose, and
Yeah.
then you've got Ducks and Vegas. So I'm gonna say they go 3-4.
Well, they're going to win 3 out of 4. You're saying?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I
I'm
think.
just setting you up to be the pessimist, cynical journalist, right?
Well, I mean, they should beat the Sharks. They should beat the Ducks. The Kraken are a tough team, right? The Kraken seem to
Yeah.
have turned the corner a little bit. Obviously, hosting Vegas next Thursday is going to be, I think, an exciting game. To me, it's tough to predict the Vegas game, depending on what we don't know as we're speaking right now about the Canucks' health situation. But I think you're not crazy. I think 3 out of 4 is definitely doable. I'm doing the same thing.
That's good. The difference is I have them beating Vegas and losing to Seattle only because I really want to see this rivalry grow. Like
Yeah.
I'm obviously an old guy. I was around, you know, for the original days of Sounders and Whitecaps, which was
Right.
a really serious rivalry.
Yeah.
Everyone
Yeah. Yeah.
wanted the Grizzlies and Sonics to be rivals. Never happened. Seattle just didn't
Yeah.
care
Yeah.
about Vancouver. They were
No.
so bad. So I'd really love. I'm typically, if you're going to see a rivalry, geography does amplify it, but you
Yeah.
need to play in
Yeah.
the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
I'd love to
Yeah.
see these teams in a series, but there we
Oh,
go.
that'd be great. That would be a fantastic. I mean, that'd be a dream come true for the NHL to have these 2 playoff series. But I'm
Yeah.
not sure this is the year.
Yeah. All right, well, we'll leave it there. Thanks, Patrick, again. Thank you to Paragon Roofing, paragonroofingbc.ca. Go there, get a quote. They'll do anything that your roof needs. We are giving away a pair of Canucks tickets every month. All you have to do is comment under one of Patrick's or one of Ben's, one of Mike Rapp's, anyone's story. We're just going to grab a bunch of the best comments. We'll put together a little panel, and every week you could, or every month, sorry, you could win a pair of Canuck tickets just for commenting. Canuck Report, sign up for the newsletter. All this stuff will be delivered to you right away. Thanks, everyone. Let's hope for a good week. If there's any Americans listening, happy Thanksgiving, and we will talk to you next week.